Welcome to the fourth and final episode in a Legendarium series about the history of alchemy. In part 4, from medieval to modern, we will talk about the last generation of alchemists and their contributions to modern science. A scientist named Hennig Brand, a former 17th century mercenary who married into money, devoted himself to finding the Philosopher's Stone. In doing so, he helped to bridge the gap between ancient alchemy and modern science. Believing water to possess mystical qualities, especially when passed through the human body, Brand gathered 1,500 gallons of human urine. Brand preferred to use urine from people who drank a lot of beer because of its golden color. First, he let the buckets bake in the sun and then boiled and extracted the minerals. When he distilled his final product, he created a white powder that smelled like garlic and burst into flame when exposed to the air. Brand became convinced that he found the Philosopher's Stone, which would supposedly transmute lead into gold. He named it Phosphorus, or the Light Bearer. 6 years passed before Brand finally accepted that he would create no gold with his invention, but much light. A Belgian scientist named Jean-Baptiste van Helmont also helped bridge the gap between ancient and modern science. During the late 16th and early 17th centuries, van Helmont spent nearly a decade studying the effects of chemicals upon the body. In doing so, he discovered carbon monoxide and made the first real advances in understanding the process of digestion. Van Helmont also operated an incredibly unsuccessful medical practice, mainly because he never accepted payment for any treatments he administered. Nonetheless, he continued his botanical research even while being investigated by the Spanish Inquisition, as Spain ruled his Belgian homeland. He became the first man to prove that absorbing water led directly to plant growth. In doing so, van Helmont challenged Aristotle's ancient idea of the four elements and argued that water served as the basis of life. Alchemy had come full circle. Modern alchemists, through scientific experiment and investigation, now challenged the ancient basis of alchemical thought, and in doing so, they undermined hopes of finding the Philosopher's Stone. Ironically, van Helmont claimed to have seen the Philosopher's Stone in action. He described it as being the same color as saffron in powder, and claimed he used it to turn 8 ounces of quicksilver into gold. Even if this did not happen, which it likely did not, these later alchemists changed human knowledge. In tightly controlled experiments, they made metals bubble, change colors, and grow sparkling filaments. They did it repeatedly, establishing, in a crude way, the foundations of scientific experimentation. This new scientific method, which would gradually replace alchemy, was best used by one of the most famous names in the modern world, Sir Isaac Newton. His contributions to mainstream mathematics and science are well known, yet the now discredited field of alchemy preoccupied Isaac Newton. While Newton did not publish his alchemical research as he did his other findings, he wrote much about it. Newton spent much time sifting through the works of his alchemical predecessors, trying to decode what they wrote about the Philosopher's Stone. This was not easy because most alchemists wrote in cryptic code. For example, they described silver as Diana's doves. Since no alchemist wanted others to get their research, each one used a different code, including Newton. In his notes on alchemy, about 1 million words in total, Newton made cryptic references to things called green lion, Neptune's trident, and the scepter of Jove. The writing is highly romantic and far removed from a science textbook, all the more striking when one considers it came from one of the great scientific geniuses of the modern world. In alchemy, Newton worked with Irish scientific great Robert Boyle, himself a pioneer in vacuums and air pumps. When Boyle created a solvent that could dissolve gold, he described it as philosophical mercury, supposedly a key ingredient in the long-sought and elusive Philosopher's Stone. In mid-1693, not long after Boyle's death, Newton suffered what would now be called a nervous breakdown. After 5 nights of sleeping not a wink, he lost all grip on reality and became convinced that his friends John Locke and Samuel Pepys conspired against him. He later confessed to Locke that, "When one told me you were sickly, I answered, 'twere better if you were dead.'" Thankfully, Newton recovered by year's end. Many in his time and our time wonder if mercury used in alchemical research caused his madness. Newton's madness passed, but his revolution in scientific thought did not. Nonetheless, a belief in the Philosopher's Stone and the creation of gold from lead persisted for at least another generation. Johann Friedrich Butker lived at the turn of the 18th century, when alchemy was falling out of favor in respectable circles. His fellow men viewed him as either a magic man or an absolute fraud because of his wild claims that he could turn lead into gold. At the age of just 19, King Friedrich Augustus I of Saxony ordered Butker to make good on his wild claims that he could create gold, or else he would lose 10 pounds from the neck up. Butker, preferring to keep his head where it was, tried to flee the country, but the king's men returned him to house arrest and ordered him to create gold or else. After years of work, he finally made white gold. China had developed porcelain 1,000 years ago, but kept its manufacture a closely guarded secret. While imported to Europe, it became known as white gold because of its terrific expense. Artists and artisans tried for decades to make European porcelain, but failed repeatedly. Finally, the alchemist Butker and the traditional scientist Ehrenfried Walther von Chisenhaus created heavy red stoneware that could be used in manufacturing European porcelain. This made the king happy, who let Butker keep his head, and led to the creation of European porcelain, the next best thing to real gold. The ancient alchemist and the modern scientist had become one and the same, and the latter could not have existed without the former. That wraps things up for this episode of the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.